It was a crisp autumn evening when Jared and Mia decided to take a spontaneous road trip to clear their minds from the chaos of city life. The couple had been together for 4 years and often sought solace in the peace of nature. Jared found a secluded cabin rental online, located deep in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest and endless silence. Perfect getaway, Jared had said, unaware of the nightmare awaiting them. The GPS led them onto a winding dirt road as the sun dipped below the horizon. The deeper they drove, the patchier the GPS signal became. Trees loomed on either side, their skeletal branches scraping against the car like claws. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Mia asked, gripping the seatbelt tightly. "Relax," Jared reassured her. "The ad said it's remote. That's the point, remember?" Just as doubt began creeping in, the cabin emerged from the shadows. It stood eerily still, bathed in moonlight, surrounded by silence so profound it made their ears ring. The place looked nothing like the cozy pictures online. The wood was weathered and splintered, and the windows were so grimy they reflected no light. But they were too tired to turn back. The cabin was small, with basic furniture and a fireplace. Jared lit a fire while Mia unpacked their supplies. But as night enveloped the cabin, unsettling noises began to fill the air. A faint, rhythmic knocking echoed from the walls. At first they dismissed it as the house settling. Then came the sound of distant whispers, low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift through the cracks in the wooden walls. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered. "It's probably just the wind," Jared replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The whispers grew louder as the night wore on. Jared checked outside with a flashlight, but found nothing except endless trees swaying in the cold breeze. The couple finally decided to sleep, brushing off the noises as their imagination. The next morning, sunlight broke through the trees, and the couple felt more at ease. While exploring the cabin, Mia stumbled upon a locked door at the end of a narrow hallway. It was padlocked and heavily scratched, as if someone, or something, had tried to claw its way in or out. "Why would a rental cabin have a locked room?" she asked, uneasy. "Maybe it's just storage," Jared replied. "Let's not overthink it." But Mia couldn't shake the ominous feeling the door gave her. She swore she heard faint scratching coming from behind it. Later that day, while rummaging through a drawer, Jared found a tattered journal. The pages were yellowed and smelled of mildew. It belonged to someone named Eleanor, and detailed her time living in the cabin in the 1950s. Eleanor wrote about her husband, who had become obsessed with a presence in the forest. He claimed it whispered his name at night and watched him during the day. The last entry was chilling. "I hear it too now. It wants in. He says we must lock the door, but I'm afraid it's already inside." Mia froze. "What does that even mean?" Jared laughed nervously. "It's just an old story. Don't let it freak you out." But both of them felt the unease creep back into the room. That night, the whispers returned, closer, louder. Jared and Mia huddled together in bed, too scared to move. Around 2 a.m., a loud thump echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Jared grabbed a flashlight and crept out of the bedroom. Mia followed, clutching a kitchen knife. The footsteps stopped near the locked door. As Jared shone the light toward it, they both saw something that made their blood run cold. Wet footprints led directly to the padlocked door, but the floor was dry everywhere else. "Someone's in here," Mia whispered. The couple checked every corner of the cabin. but they found no one. The door remained locked, yet the footprints lingered. Determined to leave the next morning, Jared and Mia packed their bags at dawn. But when they stepped outside, the car wouldn't start. Frustrated, Jared popped the hood, only to find the engine wires severed cleanly. As he tried to figure out what to do, Mia noticed something in the distance, glowing lights deep in the forest. They danced and flickered like fireflies, but they were too large and moved too deliberately to be natural. "Let's go back inside," Mia urged, her voice shaking. But Jared, drawn by curiosity, took a few steps toward the woods. The lights vanished instantly, leaving only an oppressive silence. Jared backed away, his instincts finally kicking in. That night, they barricaded the bedroom door and kept the flashlight on. Around midnight, a loud snap echoed through the cabin, followed by a guttural growl. The padlocked door had burst open. Mia screamed as Jared held the flashlight steady. Shadows darted across the walls, too fast to be human. The growling grew louder, joined by the sound of heavy breathing. Suddenly, the bedroom door rattled violently, as if something was trying to break it down. Jared and Mia clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. Then, just as quickly as it started, the noises stopped. The couple sat in silence until dawn, too terrified to sleep. At first light, they bolted out of the cabin, abandoning their belongings. To their shock, the dirt road they had driven on was gone, replaced by an overgrown forest path. It took them hours to find their way out, and when they finally reached a main road, they flagged down a passing car. When they tried to report the cabin to the authorities, no records of it existed. The GPS coordinates led to an empty clearing in the woods. Weeks later, while unpacking their remaining bags at home, Mia found something chilling. In her jacket pocket was a small yellowed photograph of the cabin. Written on the back, in smeared ink, were the words, "You can't leave it behind." They never spoke of the cabin again, but every now and then they hear whispers coming from the walls of their own home. It was supposed to be a weekend of peace and quiet. Anna, a freelance photographer, had decided to take a trip into the countryside for inspiration. She found an old farmhouse listed for rent online. The pictures showed a quaint, charming home surrounded by endless fields, far from the noise of city life. When Anna arrived, the farmhouse looked older than the pictures suggested. The white paint was chipped, and the windows seemed to sag with age. Behind the house stretched miles of dry, yellow fields, and at the edge of the property stood a single towering oak tree. Beneath it was a weathered stone well. The property owner, an elderly man named Mr. Hargrove, had been friendly but odd during their brief meeting. He'd handed her the keys with trembling hands and muttered, "Stay away from the well. It's not safe." Anna laughed nervously, thinking it was just an old man's superstition. She dismissed his warning as local folklore and settled into the house, eager to capture the rustic beauty of the countryside. The first night was uneventful, though the farmhouse had an unsettling stillness. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and the creaking of the old house made it difficult for Anna to fall asleep. Around 3 a.m., she was awakened by a faint sound, a rhythmic clinking noise, like metal tapping against stone. Curious but cautious, Anna peered out of the window. The well beneath the oak tree seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight. She stared at it for a long moment but saw nothing unusual. Eventually, she convinced herself it was just the wind and went back to bed. The next morning, Anna ventured outside with her camera. She took pictures of the farmhouse, the fields, and the solitary oak tree. Her lens lingered on the well. The stones were moss-covered, and the wooden cover looked ancient, with deep scratches across its surface. Something about it felt wrong. As she stepped closer, she noticed strange carvings etched into the stone, a series of symbols that looked neither random nor familiar. She ran her fingers over them, feeling a chill creep up her spine. Ignoring her unease, Anna lifted the camera to take a shot of the well. But the moment she clicked the shutter, a loud clang echoed from within. She jumped back, her heart racing. Peering over the edge, she saw only darkness. No water, no bottom, just an endless void. She snapped a few more photos and hurried back inside, telling herself it was probably just an echo. That evening, while exploring the farmhouse, Anna found an old photo album tucked away in a dusty drawer. The pictures were black and white, depicting the farmhouse decades ago. In one photo, a family of 4 stood smiling in front of the well. The father, mother, and 2 children looked happy, but their eyes seemed off, lifeless, almost hollow. Flipping through the album, Anna's fingers froze when she reached the last page. It was blank, except for a single note scrawled in faded ink. "Don't listen to the voices." She slammed the album shut and tried to shake off the creeping dread. "It's just an old photo," she whispered to herself. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. That night, as Anna edited her photos, a strange sensation washed over her. The farmhouse seemed to grow colder, and the silence became oppressive. Then she heard it, a faint whisper. At first it was soft, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder and more distinct. It was coming from the well. Gripping her flashlight, Anna stepped outside, her heart pounding. The wind had picked up, and the oak tree's branches swayed like skeletal arms. As she approached the well, the whispering stopped. Everything went deathly quiet. Anna shone the flashlight into the well. The beam of light disappeared into the darkness. Then, just as she turned to leave, she heard it again. This time unmistakably clear. A voice called her name. "Anna!" She froze, her breath hitching. It wasn't just a voice. It sounded like her own. Panicked, she ran back to the house, slamming the door behind her. She didn't sleep that night, every creak and groan of the house sending her heart racing. The next morning, Anna decided to pack up and leave. She grabbed her camera to review the pictures, hoping to distract herself. But as she scrolled through the images, her blood ran cold. The photos of the well were gone. In their place were new photos she hadn't taken. They showed her, standing by the well, staring into it, her expression blank and lifeless. The final photo sent chills down her spine. It was a close-up of her face, but her eyes weren't her own. They were black, hollow voids. Frantic, Anna searched the farmhouse for any explanation. That's when she noticed muddy footprints leading from the front door to the well. Desperate for answers, Anna remembered Mr. Hargrove's warning. She searched the drawers for any clues and found a folded letter hidden under the bed. It was addressed to the farmhouse's next guest. The letter read, "If you're reading this, you've already heard it. The well doesn't just call, it pulls. It shows you things, makes you see yourself. Don't trust what you hear. Don't trust what you see. And whatever you do, don't look inside." The letter ended abruptly. The ink smudged as if written in haste. Anna's hands trembled as she dropped it. That night, the whispering returned, louder than ever. It wasn't just her name this time. It was a chorus of voices, pleading, screaming, laughing. They spoke in unison. "Look inside. Come closer." Anna barricaded herself in the bedroom, clutching the letter. But the voices grew louder, and now they were inside the house. The footsteps returned, heavy and deliberate, pacing outside her door. Then the door handle began to turn. In a moment of sheer terror, Anna flung the window open and climbed out, running toward her car. The voices followed, echoing through the fields. As she started the car and sped away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse stood still in the distance, but the oak tree was different. A figure now hung from its branches, swaying gently in the wind. Beneath it, the well seemed to glow faintly. Relieved to be miles away, Anna pulled over to catch her breath. But as she looked around, her stomach dropped. The dirt road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by the same dry fields. In the distance, she saw it again, the oak tree and the well. She was back where she started. Frantic, she turned the car around and drove in the opposite direction, but no matter where she went, the farmhouse reappeared. Time seemed to blur, and the sun never rose. The voices were in her head now, louder and more insistent. "Come back! It's waiting!" Anna's screams faded into the darkness as the farmhouse swallowed her whole. Weeks later, another traveler arrived, renting the old farmhouse for a weekend getaway. The property owner, Mr. Hargrove, handed over the keys with a trembling smile. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his eyes glinting with something dark. "Just stay away from the well." Danny and Lisa had been dating for 2 years when they decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains. Both were avid hikers, and Danny wanted to surprise Lisa with a remote cabin rental he found online. It was described as off the grid, tucked deep in the forest, surrounded by miles of unspoiled wilderness, perfect for a romantic getaway, or so he thought. The journey to the cabin was an adventure in itself. Their car bounced along a rocky dirt road that wound through towering pine trees. No cell service, no GPS, just a printed map, and Danny's questionable sense of direction. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set. The cabin looked exactly as advertised, a rustic wooden structure with a small porch, a stone chimney, and an outhouse a short distance away. It was the kind of place you'd see on the cover of a nature magazine, though it felt eerily isolated. Danny parked the car and turned to Lisa. "What do you think?" Lisa hesitated. "It's quaint, but are we the only ones around for miles?" "That's the idea," Danny said with a grin. "Just us and nature." As they unpacked, Lisa found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. It was brittle and yellowed with age, and the handwriting was spidery and uneven. It read, "If you hear the whispers, don't follow them. They lie." Lisa frowned. "What the hell is this?" Danny laughed nervously. "Probably just someone trying to scare the renters. Old cabins always have weird legends, right?" Lisa wasn't so sure. She pocketed the note, her unease growing. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees, and darkness swallowed the forest. The cabin was cozy but cold, so Danny lit a fire while Lisa prepared dinner. They laughed and talked, the tension from the drive melting away. By the time they crawled into bed, the cabin felt almost welcoming. But around 2 a.m., Lisa woke up. At first, she wasn't sure what had stirred her. The cabin was silent, except for the soft crackle of the dying fire. Then she heard it, soft, faint, barely audible. A whisper. At first she thought it was Danny talking in his sleep, but his breathing was slow and steady, She sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, coming from outside the cabin. "Danny," she hissed, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" Danny groaned. "It's probably the wind." "No," Lisa said. "It sounds like voices." Danny listened for a moment, then shrugged. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there. The next morning, Lisa stepped outside to find a strange symbol carved into the cabin's front door. It was a circular pattern with jagged lines radiating outward like a crude sunburst. "Danny, did you do this?" Lisa called. Danny frowned as he joined her. "Of course not. Maybe it was already here." "No," Lisa insisted. "I would have noticed it last night." Danny tried to brush it off, but Lisa couldn't ignore the unease twisting in her stomach. She couldn't help but think of the note. They lie. After breakfast, they decided to go for a hike. Danny wanted to check out a nearby lake he'd read about, and Lisa reluctantly agreed. But as they walked, the trail seemed wrong. The forest was unnervingly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of their boots on the dirt. And the farther they went, the more the trail seemed to change. Trees they'd passed earlier appeared again, as if they were walking in circles. "I think we're lost," Lisa said, panic creeping into her voice. "No way," Danny replied, though his confidence wavered. "We've been following the map." But the map made no sense anymore. It showed a clear path to the lake, but all they saw were endless trees. Then came the whispers. They were faint at first, just like the night before. But as they stood there, trying to make sense of the trail, the whispers grew louder. And this time, they weren't just random murmurs. They were calling Lisa's name. "Lisa." Her blood turned to ice. "Danny, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The voices. They're calling my name." Danny shook his head. "I don't hear anything." Lisa's heart raced. She grabbed his arm. "We need to go back, now." By the time they found their way back, the sun was beginning to set. But as they stepped into the clearing, Lisa stopped dead in her tracks. The cabin was gone. "What the hell?" Danny muttered, spinning around. "This is where we left it, right?" Lisa nodded, her throat tight with fear. The clearing was empty, save for their car, which sat untouched in the fading light. "I don't understand," Lisa whispered. "How does a cabin just disappear?" Danny tried to stay calm. "Maybe we took the wrong trail back. Let's keep looking." But as darkness fell, the whispers returned, closer, louder, and more insistent. "Lisa, Danny, come to us." The voices seemed to come from all directions, echoing through the trees. Then Lisa saw something that made her scream. Beneath the oak tree, where the cabin should have been, stood a figure. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing eyes that burned like embers. It didn't move, but Lisa felt its gaze pierce through her. "We need to leave," she gasped. "Now." Danny and Lisa bolted to the car and sped down the dirt road, their hearts pounding. But no matter how far they drove, the road seemed to stretch on forever. The trees blurred together, and the whispers followed them, growing louder. Finally, they saw a light up ahead. Relief washed over them until they realized it was the cabin. "No," Lisa whispered. "That's impossible." They had driven in a straight line, yet they were back where they started. The cabin had returned, its windows glowing with an eerie orange light. "I'm not going back in there," Lisa said, trembling. "We don't have a choice," Danny replied. "It's the only shelter we have." Reluctantly, they stepped inside. The air was thick and heavy, and the fire in the hearth burned brighter than before, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As they searched the cabin for answers, Lisa found another note, this one tucked under the bed. It read, "The cabin calls to you. It shows you what you fear, what you desire. But it's not real. None of it is real." Before she could show Danny, the whispers turned into screams, the cabin shook violently, and the shadows on the walls began to move, reaching for them. "Run!" Danny shouted, but the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The figure from the oak tree appeared in the doorway, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Lisa clutched Danny's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Why is this happening?" she cried. The figure stepped closer, and the world around them dissolved into darkness. When Lisa woke up, she was alone. The cabin was gone. The forest was gone. She was lying in an empty field, the sky above her gray and featureless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She had service again. Frantic, she called Danny's name, but there was no answer. Then her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. It read, "You should have listened to the whispers." Lisa never found Danny. To this day, she avoids remote places, haunted by the memory of the cabin that called and the darkness it left behind.